Hi, I'm Cody Anderson, one of the pastors here at Parker United Methodist Church. Well, we're continuing our superhero series, and this last Sunday we talked about Spider-Man. Now, Spider-Man is one of these characters that is super well known. He's probably one of the most famous of the superheroes, as Pastor Laura said, and I think that there's a reason for that. If you remember, Peter Parker is a teenage boy, and he's going through all of this teenage angst and emotions. Not only is he being raised by his aunt and uncle, and then his uncle tragically dies, so he has a lot of grief and a lot of turmoil, but he also doesn't really fit in at school. Remember, he only has a few really close friends, but everyone else kind of teases him, makes fun of him. And so he's an average teenager with average problems, with trying to figure out who he is in the world and all the insecurities that come with that. And along that journey of being a teenager with all of those insecurities and all the angst, he gets bit by that radioactive spider, and his life is transformed. Now, on the outside, when you look at Peter Parker, he looks the exact same, gawky little teenager, right, who not quite sure in his body. But when Peter Parker puts on the mask, puts on that superhero costume, and embraces his superhero identity, amazing things happen. Peter Parker is able to show up for people in ways that he never thought possible with that transformation. I think the reason that his story hits so close to home is because we all have been there, right? We all have gone through that teenage angst, anxiety, insecurities, trying to figure out who we are and what we're supposed to do in this world and how we're supposed to relate with one another. And along the way, we grow up into adults. Adults who are, for the most part, successful. We have friends and family that are around us, but deep inside, there's still that little hint of a teenager sometimes that is trying to cry out, to call out, who feels insecure, who might have a little bit of angst, who is trying to figure out where they belong in this world. That's where our faith enters in. I think a lot of us, if we were to explain our faith, to explain how we might feel God is calling us to do things in the world, to show up in the world, to help others in the world, I think that a lot of us would go back into that insecure place, right? That teenage insecurity. It's really hard to talk about our faith. It's really hard to show up and to do when we don't really know what that looks like for us. And so we carry a lot of insecurity within our faith. Do we even have faith? I feel like there's a lot of doubts that I have that haven't been answered. And I'm anxious that if I show up and I tell my friends that I'm a follower of Jesus, that they might reject me forever. And if I try to help this person, what if I'm not successful? What if I don't have the right tools to be able to help them? What if I end up offending somebody? What if? And so for a lot of us, those insecurities can kind of hold us back, can keep us from donning that transformation of the superhero costume, of putting all of those insecurities aside and showing up and trusting that God will meet us there. And a lot of us too, I think, have insecurities about our own gifts and talents. It's hard for us to understand what it is that God has placed inside of us and what we're supposed to do with that. It's so much easier to see gifts and talents in other people, right? Like Paul. Paul can play beautiful music. That's not my gift. And Noelle, she can relate to children and tell stories and share God's big love to people that I don't always have an opportunity to. And is that okay? Right? We start to look at all the other people and we start to see their gifts and their talents, and we question, did I get missed? Do I have a gift and a talent to share? Of course we do. We all have been given gifts, but it's so easy for us to devalue those gifts and talents that we've been given, to put them down, to believe that others have been given more and they should really step in and use their gifts because ours don't really matter. Can you hear those teenage insecurities and anxieties within that statement? Now, I've been working with teenagers for many years, but really focusing with them, not only my own kids, but the kids in our church, our youth in our church over this last year. And so I am privileged to be able to be walking beside these amazing people who are growing and who are trying to figure out who they are, but also trying to figure out, what they believe and how they're called to live into this world. And I see so many parallels for those of us who are adults, those of us who are also struggling to figure out what we believe, trying to figure out what our place is in this world. But I want to tell you, just like I tell our youth, your gifts and talents matter. And a lot of times we can't see them in ourselves. So we need to surround ourselves with people who truly know us, who see us, who can tell us, hey, this is a gift that I see in you. Hey, you have the gift of hospitality. Have you ever thought about just greeting at the front door on Sunday mornings? Being that smiling and welcoming face for somebody who's entering into this space? Or, hey, you really went through a hard thing there. Have you thought about how that has made you so much more compassionate for others, and how you might be able to share your story and journey with others who are going through the same thing? I know, like Pastor Laura said, for me to understand my calling, it took people in my life who could speak into that, who could say, Cody, I see this as a spiritual gift of yours. Have you ever thought about becoming a pastor? My answer, of course, was not in my wildest dreams. That was never on the radar. But then again, for Peter Parker, it was never on his radar to become Spider-Man, right? God has a way of working inside of our lives and giving us gifts and talents that we never thought possible, and leading us down paths that we never thought we would go on, to reach people who we never thought would need us. In James, it tells us to not just be hearers of the word, but be doers of the word. So often we get caught up in just being hearers of the word, right? Of coming to Sunday school, of coming to worship, and then going about our lives in a normal, everyday way. But what would it look like if we began to embrace those gifts and talents inside of us and to show up in new ways in the world, to do things that we never thought we would do, to speak words that we never thought we would speak, to go to the places where we hear sirens and we see trouble, and to offer our gifts and talents to help meet the needs of those people who are there. It takes a lot of faith. It takes a lot of faith to trust that God has placed us in the spot that we're supposed to be, with the gifts and talents that are needed to help not only ourselves, but to help our community. So what would it look like if we embraced that faith? That if we became doers of the word, if we joined our forces together and we began to use our gifts and talents in the way that God has called us to, and that we might be able to show up in places and speak words of peace and hope and love to those who desperately need to hear it. Let's take a moment to address those insecurities that we have, to face them head on. But then let's continue to grow in our faith, to lay those insecurities aside and to trust that the power is within us to do far more than we could ever imagine.